step into the Forbidden City, where golden dragons gleamed on palace walls and whispers carried more danger than swords. Among the emperor's countless attendants lived the male concubines, men chosen not for battle or scholarship, but for beauty, obedience, and the secret pleasures of the court. To outsiders, they appeared privileged, dressed in silk and close to the sun of heaven. But behind the veils of luxury lay lives shaped by fragile power, jealousy, and rules so strict that one misstep would mean disgrace or death. Their bodies became tokens of favor, their silence the price of survival. This is the story rarely written in official records. What it truly meant to be desired, yet disposable, in the world's most powerful empire. Comment the time you're watching this. I love seeing when my history travelers arrive. And if forbidden history fascinates you, subscribing is always your choice. But the next secrets run even deeper. They drag you past the Crimson Palace gates, and suddenly, the clamor of the marketplace. The hawkers selling steamed buns, the laughter of street children, the squawking of caged birds. All of it fades as though someone slammed a lid over your life. The moment you cross that threshold, you stop being just another face in the crowd and become a possession of the palace. Imagine stepping onto a movie set where every detail screams luxury. Silk banners, carved pillars, guards in gleaming armor. Yet you're not a guest. You're the prop. Your childhood street games, your mother's voice, even your own name feel as if they've been confiscated at the gate. It's dazzling, yes, but also suffocating. You're not free to look around like a tourist snapping photos. You're being measured, weighed, sorted. The guards don't bother explaining the rules, because silence here is more powerful than words. You can tell what's expected of you just by watching how others shrink when an official glides by. No one dares to cough, let alone laugh. It reminds you of those times in school when the principal walked in unannounced, and suddenly even the class clown became a model student. Multiply that by 1,000, add the possibility of a beheading, and you've got the atmosphere of the Forbidden City. Your journey here wasn't voluntary. Male concubines in ancient China were often chosen from poor families or captured from enemies, their destinies rerouted into the palace machinery. You might have been a farmer's son, carrying water jars and swatting mosquitoes, when suddenly an imperial decree yanked you into this silk-draped world. The contrast stings. One day, you're trudging through muddy fields. The next, you're treading marble floors so polished you could check your hair in them. But grandeur can feel like a trap. The palace sprawls like a labyrinth, every corridor a copy of the last, every courtyard echoing with the same metallic clink of guards' halberds. You begin to realize how clever this design is. From outside, the palace is the heart of power. Inside, it's a maze designed to disorient newcomers like you. If you've ever walked into a modern luxury mall and felt like the shops were arranged to confuse you into buying more, you'd understand. Only here, the cost of a wrong turn might be much heavier than your wallet. There's also the overwhelming smell, a mix of incense, lacquered wood, and the faint metallic tang of bronze censers burning all day. It's intoxicating, but oppressive, like walking into a perfume store, where every scent is fighting for attention. Some concubines described feeling constantly dizzy in their first days, not from fear alone, but from the sheer sensory overload of palace life. Then come the first whispers of your new reality. You are no longer your own. Every gesture, every blink, every step is watched. you're reminded of the story of Wei Zhongxian, one of the most infamous eunuchs of the Ming dynasty, who rose from lowly origins to wield power greater than ministers. The message is clear. This place can make or break you, depending on how well you read the currents. Officials don't need to say it aloud. You can feel it in the way they look at you, as though they're deciding whether you're useful or disposable. What do you do in such a place? Do you shrink and hope to be invisible? Or do you try to shine just enough to be noticed, but not envied? That's the delicate balance every male concubine learns quickly. If you've ever started a new job where office politics mattered more than actual work, you already have a taste of it. Here, however, the stakes are magnified. Loyalty is life. A misstep is death. The younger ones among you might find a strange thrill in the velvet curtains and golden screens. You tell yourself it's a step up from hauling firewood back home. But even as you marvel, you notice the older concubines' faces. Their eyes carry the weight of decades spent walking this tightrope. They nod politely, but you sense no joy. It's like when you see veteran employees at a company roll their eyes at the enthusiasm of the new hires. They know something you don't, and it's not encouraging. And yet, there's a certain allure to it all. Standing in those endless halls, you catch sight of paintings of dragons coiling through clouds, jade ornaments glowing under lamplight, bronze cauldrons etched with history. You're awestruck because, for a moment, you're inside the very heartbeat of empire. Ordinary peasants will never step this far in. But the beauty comes laced with barbs. You can admire the dragon, yes, but don't forget its claws. Now you're led deeper, past the courtyards where peacocks strut and musicians pluck strings that echo off the tiled walls. The escorts barely glance at you. They've seen hundreds of boys like you come through, each thinking he might be special. Their indifference stings more than cruelty. At least cruelty acknowledges you exist. Here, you are both everywhere and nowhere, swallowed into the system like a pebble tossed into a vast lake. You're ushered into a small chamber, and the air suddenly feels heavier than stone walls alone could explain. The officials don't announce it with a drum roll or a proclamation. Yet you know instinctively what comes next. This is the point of no return. The cutting, as everyone whispers about it, isn't framed as cruelty here, but as necessity. In the logic of the palace, a male concubine must be reshaped to fit the machine. If the emperor is the sun, then you're being molded into a shadow, unable to cast airs that might threaten the dynasty's light. It's not a choice. It's the admission ticket. Think about how athletes today undergo rigorous, sometimes painful training to fit into a team. That's the mild version. Here, your body itself is altered to guarantee loyalty. And though no one speaks of it in detail, the silence around it is suffocating. You know it's going to hurt. You know it will brand you forever. And yet you're expected to carry it with bowed head and sealed lips. The men who perform this ritual are matter of fact, like surgeons with no bedside manner. For them, it's Tuesday. For you, it's the dividing line between your old life and the one that lies ahead. Records from the Han and Tang dynasties describe how boys often went through the procedure young. Some barely in their teens, because pliability made them easier to shape into loyal servants. The cruelty wasn't in the steel knife alone, but in the way the system turned the intimate into political insurance. You try not to think of the body you once had, the life you once dreamed of. Perhaps you thought of marrying a village girl, planting millet together, raising children who would laugh in the fields. All of that dissolves in a single stroke. And here's the chilling part. You aren't the first, and you won't be the last. Thousands of boys before you have stood on this same stone floor, and their silence lingers like an invisible crowd. The aftermath is a mix of pain and shame. Some eunuchs, like Liang Ji of the Han court, turn their scars into stepping stones, climbing the hierarchy to wield immense influence. But in the beginning, there's only dizziness, weakness, and a sense that your very self has been taken hostage. The officials don't comfort you. They simply hand you a set of robes, thin silk, dyed in muted colors, and expect you to put them on as if nothing monumental has happened. You might ask yourself, how do you keep your sense of humor in such a situation? That's the strange resilience of human beings. Some concubines later joked among themselves about their rebirth, dark humor becoming a survival mechanism. Imagine co-workers today making light of a brutal restructuring at the office. It doesn't erase the pain, but laughter makes the unbearable a little less so. The silence afterward is as telling as the act itself. You're not allowed to speak of what's been done. Not to family, not even to fellow concubines in training. It's as though the palace itself erases a part of your vocabulary. Your body changes, but so does your language. Words that once belonged to you are no longer yours to use. You begin to realize that control here isn't just physical, it's psychological. A eunuch like Gao Lishi, who served under Emperor Xuanzong in the Tang dynasty, shows how this transformation could become a tool. He endured the ritual like everyone else, but later he became one of the emperor's most trusted companions, influencing policy and even guiding the emperor in matters of art and governance. Pain, in this twisted logic, is an investment that might one day pay political dividends. Still, in this moment, you don't see the future. You only feel the sharp edges of loss. The palace expects you to adjust overnight, to walk with your back straight and head bowed, as if nothing monumental has shifted in your existence. Yet you know that outside the walls, peasants still plow, merchants still haggle, and lovers still stroll under lantern light. For them, the world continues unbroken. For you, time split into a before and after. And as you shuffle down the corridor in those new robes, the walls echo with your footsteps in a way that makes you wonder if the building itself is listening. Because from here on out, every step, every glance, every word is part of the performance. And the audience, the emperor, the ministers, the palace women, even the faceless guards, all waiting to see whether you crumble or learn how to turn silence into survival. Your recovery is barely complete when the real training begins. It isn't enough to have survived the knife. Now you must be sculpted into someone the emperor might find useful, or at the very least, entertaining. You're not handed a scroll with instructions. Instead, you're dropped into an endless cycle of lessons, as if you've stumbled into a bizarre finishing school where the stakes aren't grades, but survival. They start with posture. Stand too stiff, and you look like a soldier. Too relaxed, and you look lazy. The instructors want you to strike that impossible balance where you appear graceful, yet humble, confident, but never threatening. You spend hours walking back and forth across polished floors, while a supervisor barks corrections. Shoulders back, eyes lowered, hands tucked. If you've ever tried to master walking in high heels, imagine that, but with your future depending on it. Then comes speech. Words must glide like silk, not tumble like rocks. You're taught to recite poetry from memory, especially the elegant verses of Li Bai and Du Fu. It's not about understanding every line. It's about proving that beauty can flow from your mouth like incense smoke. You practice bowing with just the right angle, offering compliments that are clever but not obsequious. One wrong word could turn admiration into suspicion. Think of it like navigating a modern corporate dinner, where you must charm the boss without looking like you're trying too hard. There's also music. You might be handed a pipa or a flute, instruments designed to weave sound like threads of silk. The aim isn't to become a virtuoso, but to be capable of filling a silence if the emperor's mood demands it. The palace doesn't tolerate dull company. You learn quickly that your value lies not in who you are, but in how well you can shapeshift into what someone else desires at any moment. And then, of course, there are the subtler lessons. How to smile without showing too many teeth. How to glide through a doorway so quietly it seems you're carried by air. How to pour tea so smoothly that not a drop dares to splash. It sounds trivial, but every tiny motion is a signal. You're reminded constantly that you're not just serving food or playing music. You're performing. History is full of eunuchs who mastered these arts so well that they became indispensable. Take Zhang Rong of the late Han Dynasty, for instance. He was skilled at both flattery and administration, and eventually wielded such power that even generals had to bow before him. His rise wasn't due to brute strength, but to his ability to read a room, sense a mood, and respond with precision. The palace is less a battlefield of swords than of subtleties, and your training is the armor you'll need. Still, not everything is polished elegance. Behind closed doors, instructors are ruthless. If you stumble over your words or botch a bow, the reprimand can be public and humiliating. They want you to feel the sting, because shame is a better teacher than encouragement here. Imagine a reality TV show where judges gleefully tear contestants apart. That's mild compared to this. In the palace, failure isn't just embarrassing. It brands you as dispensable. You might wonder how someone endures such constant scrutiny without cracking. The secret is that most concubines develop a second skin, a persona to wear like armor. Outwardly, you're serene, graceful, obedient. Inwardly, you may be counting heartbeats until the lesson ends. Over time, the line blurs. You forget where the act stops and where you begin. Perhaps that's the goal. Occasionally, moments of absurd humor lighten the tension. One concubine spills tea in front of a stern instructor, and for a brief second, the room teeters between laughter and punishment. Even the instructors, stiff as bamboo poles, sometimes smirk at the ridiculousness of making a young man spend hours practicing how to hold a fan without looking clumsy. It's a reminder that even in the most rigid systems, humanity seeps through the cracks. By the time the sun sets, your feet ache, your head pounds with memorized verses, and your smile feels glued in place. Yet you know tomorrow will bring the same regimen. You begin to realize that the palace doesn't just train you, it rewires you. Every bow, every line of poetry, every careful gesture is a stitch in a new identity, one that no longer belongs to you, but to the empire. They open the doors to the inner chambers, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight of silk or gold. It's the smell. Sweet perfumes, sandalwood incense, the faint musk of bodies who've lived too long in luxury. The air feels heavy, as though it's been steeped for centuries in cosmetics and secrets. And here's the hook. You thought the palace gates were intimidating? No, this is the true heart of captivity. These chambers are beautiful cages, and you're one of the exotic birds now trapped inside. The floors gleam with tiles so polished they reflect your face back at you. But the reflection is distorted, stretched by the angle, like a funhouse mirror that makes you question who you've become. Silk curtains cascade from the ceilings, separating rooms in layers so thick you wonder how anyone keeps track of where they are. It's like being inside an endless maze of fabric, where privacy is always an illusion. One curtain can conceal a rival's glare, another hides a whispered plot. The women of the palace drift past you like ghosts wrapped in embroidery. Some glance at you with open curiosity, others with disdain, and a few don't bother to hide their suspicion. In a place where every smile is a mask, you quickly learn to read the tilt of a chin, the flick of a fan, the narrowing of an eye. You can't exactly ask them outright what they think of you. Instead, you study their expressions as though your life depends on it, because it does. Life here is both indulgent and suffocating. Meals arrive in porcelain bowls, painted with dragons and phoenixes, filled with delicacies like bird's nest soup and candied fruits. You eat better than the emperor's soldiers, yet the sweetness is tinged with unease. The luxury isn't meant to comfort you. It's meant to remind you of what you owe. A golden bowl feels like a pair of handcuffs when you realize you can't leave the table without permission. Gossip fills the chambers more thickly than incense. Servants whisper about who has the emperor's favor this week, which concubine accidentally angered a lady in waiting, or which eunuch was caught delivering a message at the wrong time. You hear your own name whispered occasionally, and the sound makes your stomach twist. If you've ever had coworkers dissect your every move at the office water cooler, multiply that by 10 and add the possibility of execution. That's palace gossip. Sometimes you catch sight of older concubines sitting by the windows, staring out at the gardens. Their eyes don't follow the koi swimming in the ponds, the cherry blossoms falling in the breeze. They stare through the beauty, as if the splendor itself has become invisible to them. It reminds you of the way long-term prisoners can stop noticing the bars on their cell. That's when it hits you. Paradise, when it's forced, is indistinguishable from prison. Historical accounts describe these inner chambers as places of dazzling beauty. Emperors invested fortunes in jade ornaments, gold thread carpets, and painted screens to show off their magnificence. But for those who lived inside, it was like living in a museum where you were both the exhibit and the guard. The beauty wasn't for your benefit. It was to impress visitors, dignitaries, or history itself. You were simply part of the furniture. Here's where the humor seeps in, because if you don't laugh, you'll choke on the irony. You spend your days polishing skills you might never use, reciting poems no one will remember, and adjusting your robes for the 15th time so the folds look natural. It's like preparing for a job interview that never ends. You're always auditioning, but the director never calls cut. There are moments when the chambers feel alive, almost mocking you. A breeze slips through the curtains, carrying snippets of conversation. A distant zither note lingers too long, making the silence after it unbearable. You realize the palace doesn't sleep. It just shifts moods. Morning brings clattering footsteps. Evening brings hushed murmurs. And night brings the kind of silence that makes you paranoid. And in the middle of it all, you sit cross-legged on a silk cushion, trying to convince yourself that you belong here. Yet a voice inside keeps whispering. The gilded walls are closer than they appear. You don't notice it at first, but soon you feel their eyes. Not the eyes of guards or officials. Those you've learned to expect. No, these are the eyes of the palace women, each glance a puzzle you're forced to solve. Some look at you with curiosity, as if you're an odd creature newly caged. Others watch with suspicion, their lips curving in faint smiles that never reach the eyes. It's like walking into a high school cafeteria, where every table has its own politics. And you're the new kid holding a tray, praying you don't trip. Women in the palace aren't simply companions of the emperor. They're players in a dangerous game. They compete for favor, status, even survival. And here you are, another piece on the board. The irony is sharp. You were reshaped precisely so you'd never rival the emperor's heirs. Yet you're still seen as a rival for attention. You thought your struggles were with officials and eunuchs? No. Much of your daily tension comes from the subtle battlefield of glances, whispers, and polite daggers from the women who rule the inner court. The jealous ones are easy to spot. They sit straighter when you walk in, laugh louder when the emperor is nearby, and find subtle ways to diminish you. Maybe they correct your pronunciation of a poem in front of others, or accidentally spill tea near your sleeve so you appear clumsy. Small acts, but in a palace where reputation is everything, even the tiniest stain can spread. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. History gives us plenty of examples. During the Ming Dynasty, records show that palace women often formed alliances with eunuchs, sometimes for protection, sometimes for manipulation. But just as often, they sought to ruin one another. A careless word from a jealous consort could destroy a eunuch's career. One wrong rumor whispered into the right ear could turn trust into suspicion. You begin to realize you aren't just living in a palace. You're walking through a chessboard where every pawn smiles before striking. And yet, not all eyes are hostile. Some women find in you a confidant, someone safe to speak to, because you pose no official threat to their lineage. A concubine might pull you aside to share frustrations about another rival, or even seek comfort in your company. But here's the trap. The moment you listen too sympathetically, someone else notices. A relationship that feels harmless to you can be spun into suspicion by others. Imagine lending a coworker your pen, only to be accused of plotting with them to steal the boss's job. That's the level of paranoia you face daily. So how do you cope? You develop radar. You learn to read tones of voice sharper than an actor in a Shakespeare play. You notice how a woman's compliment can hide venom, how a shared laugh can conceal rivalry. You train yourself to keep your expressions mild, never too warm, never too cold. Smile too much, and you look scheming. Smile too little, and you look resentful. The middle path becomes your only safe road. Every so often, you hear of someone who failed the balancing act, a concubine who tried to undermine another only to be caught, or a eunuch who leaned too closely toward one woman's faction and vanished overnight. It reminds you that the jealous gaze isn't just annoying, it's potentially fatal. It makes modern office gossip look like child's play. At least in today's world, you don't risk exile or execution because someone didn't like how you poured their tea. But perhaps the hardest part isn't the hostility. It's the loneliness that comes with being mistrusted by default. Even when a palace woman seems kind, you second-guess her motives. Even when a laugh feels genuine, you wonder if it's bait. Trust becomes rarer than gold in these halls. And without trust, every conversation feels like walking across a frozen lake, listening for cracks beneath your feet. So when their eyes follow you, sharp as needles behind embroidered fans, you learn not to flinch. You bow, you smile faintly, you glide out of sight. Yet deep down, you know those eyes never really let you go. Behind the lacquered screens, life takes on another layer of strangeness. Out in the open halls, everything is ceremony, bows, measured words, and carefully rehearsed gestures. But slip behind those folding screens, painted with mountains, cranes, and plum blossoms, and you discover the palace's other function. It is an echo chamber of secrets. You think you're just a servant, yet before long, you realize you've become a courier of whispers, carrying truths that can bend the empire itself. It starts small. You overhear two ministers muttering in the corner, their words low, thinking no one is listening. But you are always listening, because in the palace, silence isn't passive, it's survival. Later, a concubine, frustrated with her rivals, vents to you in confidence. You don't ask for these confessions, but they land in your lap like fragile porcelain. What do you do with them? Hide them, trade them, or weaponize them? Every option is dangerous, but doing nothing is even riskier. The eunuch system thrived precisely because of this dynamic. Many eunuchs became the emperor's most trusted eyes and ears, moving like shadows where ministers could not. Wei Zhongxian, one of the most infamous power brokers of the Ming dynasty, manipulated information so effectively that he practically ran the empire. He didn't need armies or titles. He had secrets. In a palace where a single rumor could ignite suspicion, information was sharper than any blade. You quickly learned the strange rules of this hidden economy. Some secrets are too toxic to touch. Pass them along, and they might explode in your hands. Others can be traded like coins, small enough to buy you a favor from a rival eunuch, or protect you from slander. You become fluent in the art of the half-truth, sharing just enough to seem useful, never so much that you risk being accused of betrayal. It's not unlike office politics today, where knowing who dislikes whom can shape your career more than your actual skills. Only here, the stakes can be life or death. The screens themselves become symbols of this dual life. On one side, painted cranes stand serene against pine trees. On the other, hushed voices plot futures. When you walk past, you catch glimpses of courtiers leaning close, fans shielding their mouths, eyes darting around to check if you're near. And sometimes, you're asked outright to forget what you've just heard. That word, forget, becomes a command, not a request. Forgetting isn't possible, but pretending you have is an art form. There are moments of grim humor, too. You once hear a concubine mock another's hairstyle, only to see both of them arm in arm the next day, laughing as if they were sisters. You learn not to take any outward expression at face value. The palace is a theater, and everyone is both actor and audience, rehearsing lines while sneaking glances at who might be watching. The burden of carrying secrets can feel heavier than silk robes. You can't share them, not even with those you trust most, because trust itself is a luxury you don't have. You lie awake some nights, replaying whispers in your mind, wondering which ones could destroy you if repeated, which ones might save you if revealed at the right moment. It's like juggling knives in the dark. You never know when one might slip and cut. And yet, with time, you adapt. You begin to sense when someone wants you to overhear, planting a seed on purpose. You notice when an official lingers too long by a screen, hoping you'll carry his words further than he can. You become a participant in the palace's most important game, the game of controlled leaks. History remembers eunuchs who mastered this dangerous dance. Gao Lishi, for example, guided Emperor Xuanzong not only through governance, but also through the treacherous world of palace intrigue. He knew when to shield the emperor from harmful whispers, and when to pass along the truth. His survival depended not on loyalty alone, but on discernment, knowing which secrets strengthened bonds and which ones poisoned them. For you, behind those lacquered screens, the truth is always slippery. You never really know whether you're a trusted confidant or a disposable pawn. But one thing becomes clear. In a palace where silence is survival, being the keeper of secrets can make you the most dangerous figure of all, even if no one dares to say it aloud. The summons doesn't come with fanfare. There's no drumbeat, no horn. It arrives as a whisper, a eunuch leaning close to murmur, "His Majesty requests your presence." And here's the hook. This single sentence can feel heavier than a death sentence. Because when the emperor calls you, it's not just an invitation, it's a test. And every fiber of your being braces for the unknown. You wait in stillness, hands folded, trying not to fidget as the minutes crawl by. The palace corridors you've walked 1,000 times suddenly feel alien, each echo of footsteps magnified, until you're sure everyone can hear your heart pounding. When the emperor summons you at night, you're not being asked, you're being measured. Will you delight? Will you bore? Will you say the wrong thing that sours his mood? The anxiety is sharp enough to taste. The chamber you enter is thick with atmosphere. Lamps glow against gold leaf panels, shadows dancing like restless spirits on the walls. The emperor himself might recline behind a lacquered table, half hidden by smoke curling from an incense burner. You bow so low, your forehead nearly touches the floor. And when you rise, you keep your eyes carefully managed, respectful but not prying, deferential but not blank. Every gesture must be calibrated, because emperors have long memories and sharper tempers. History records how dangerous these encounters could be. A single word out of place could change the course of your life. Take the example of Zhao Gao, a eunuch from the Qin dynasty, who became infamous for manipulating the weak emperor Qin Ershi. He rose by mastering these moments, knowing exactly when to flatter, when to fall silent, and when to nudge the emperor toward decisions that suited his agenda. But for every Zhao Gao who thrived, countless others vanished into obscurity after one poorly timed remark. You're expected to fill the silence if the emperor gestures for it. Maybe you recite a verse of poetry, something melancholy if his mood is low, or something playful if his eyes flicker with restlessness. If he asks for music, You pluck your instrument with trembling fingers, praying no string snaps. If he wants laughter, you tell a story, weaving humor carefully, never daring to outshine him. It's like being on stage with the most demanding audience imaginable, one that can end your career with a flick of his wrist. The strangest part is how quickly dread can turn to opportunity. If the emperor is pleased, your position shifts overnight. Suddenly, officials who ignored you nod in greeting. Concubines who mocked you smile more warmly. A single night's performance can lift you from obscurity to influence. But you never forget the reverse is true as well. Fall out of favor, and the palace swallows you like you never existed. Waiting for the summons is often worse than the encounter itself. Hours can stretch like days, your mind spiraling with what ifs. What if he asks a question you can't answer? What if he's in a foul mood? What if another concubine has already poisoned his thoughts against you? It's the same kind of dread modern performers feel backstage, except in your case, the stakes aren't applause or bad reviews, they're survival. The chamber itself amplifies the pressure. Every detail reminds you who holds power. The dragon motifs carved into the throne, the jade ornaments glowing under candlelight, even the embroidered cushions. They all whisper, "This is his world, and you are here on sufferance." Yet, there's also a flicker of possibility in the air. If you play your role just right, this moment could become your stepping stone. So you kneel, you bow, you wait for the emperor's word, and in that stillness, you realize that a summons is never just about what you'll say or do. It's about whether you can balance dread and hope on the razor's edge, night after night, never knowing which side you'll fall on. The first time you realize proximity is power, it catches you off guard. You're not seated on a throne, not draped in dragon robes, not commanding armies. Yet the closer you are to those who do, the more invisible threads of influence begin to pull toward you. Sitting near the emperor during a meal, refilling his teacup with steady hands, or simply being present when a joke makes him laugh, these moments ripple outward. Ministers notice. Concubines notice. Suddenly, your silence carries more weight than another man's speech. At first, you think it's coincidence. Why should anyone care that you're standing a little closer than yesterday? But in the palace, everything is a symbol. If you're seen walking with the emperor or standing just behind his chair, whispers multiply. You become the trusted one, whether or not you've earned it. And that label can open doors or paint a target on your back. History proves it. Take Andahai, a favored eunuch of Empress Dowager Cixi during the Qing dynasty. He wasn't a general or a scholar, yet his closeness to her made officials tremble. Ministers who had studied for decades to earn their posts found themselves bowing before a man whose real skill was staying at her side. Proximity transformed him into a figure both envied and despised. His eventual execution showed the peril of such closeness. But until then, his influence was undeniable. For you, proximity feels less like power at first and more like a constant test. You're summoned more often, tasked with relaying messages, asked to fetch scrolls or oversee minor rituals. Each task seems trivial, yet the Emperor's trust grows every time you complete it without misstep. Before long, others start approaching you, not because of who you are, but because of where you stand. A minister might offer you gifts, hoping you'll whisper his name in the right ear. A concubine might smile too sweetly, hoping you'll carry a favorable impression back to the emperor. You're no longer just a servant. You've become a bridge. And that realization is intoxicating. Imagine working at a modern office and suddenly being seated right next to the CEO. Not because of your title, but because he happens to like your company. Every little action you take is now magnified. Every glance interpreted as insight into what the boss might do next. That's what palace life feels like. Except here, careers and reputations balance on your smallest nod. It doesn't mean you're safe. The closer you sit to silk-draped power, the hotter the flames of envy burn. Rivals begin to spread rumors. Maybe you're accused of arrogance or of manipulating access to the emperor. Some may even suggest that you've overstepped boundaries, a dangerous accusation in a court where propriety is everything. You must walk the tightrope carefully, accepting the perks of influence without flaunting them. The irony is that power by proximity is both real and fragile. You can hold it for years, as some eunuchs did, or watch it vanish overnight if the emperor's mood shifts. One moment you're at his side, the next you're reassigned to some remote duty, your name forgotten in the corridors. It teaches you a brutal truth. Power doesn't come from titles or land, but from being useful in the right place, at the right time. And so, you learn the art of presence. You don't force yourself into the emperor's notice. You wait for him to summon you. You don't boast of your influence. You let others draw their own conclusions. You become a master of appearing indispensable while pretending to be invisible. That paradox is the secret of survival. In the quiet moments, when you find yourself sitting closer to power than you ever imagined, you wonder, is this influence truly yours? Or is it just borrowed light, reflecting from the emperor's flame? But before you can answer, another minister bows a little lower in your direction, and you realize that, borrowed or not, light can still blind those who stare too long. The palace has a peculiar rhythm. One moment, someone rises like a star, dazzling the halls with favor. The next, that same star collapses into shadow. You see it again and again, and it teaches you a cruel lesson. The higher the pedestal, the faster the fall. Nothing makes this clearer than watching the emperor's favorites burn brightly, only to be discarded like festival lantern once the flame dies. At first, you're dazzled by their ascent. A concubine who once sat quietly in the corner now wears jade hairpins and commands whole teams of attendants. A eunuch who poured wine yesterday now whispers directly into the emperor's ear today. The transformation is swift and intoxicating, as though the palace itself has sprinkled gold dust over them. You can't help but wonder, will it ever be you? But the palace doesn't let you forget. Gold dust can turn to ash overnight. History records these cycles vividly. Consider Wang Zhen, a eunuch during the Ming Dynasty. He became so powerful through the emperor's favor that he commanded armies, only to be executed in disgrace when his overreach became intolerable. Or look at Lady Zhao during the Han Dynasty, whose sudden loss of favor turned her from the emperor's beloved to a prisoner within the same walls. Their stories echo like warnings through the chambers you walk daily. Favor is fickle, and its collapse can be catastrophic. You notice how quickly others adapt to these shifts. When someone rises, rivals flatter them, attach themselves like vines to a tree. When that same person falls, those vines detach overnight, clinging to a new host. Loyalty here is as thin as rice paper. It reminds you of modern celebrity culture. Fans adore someone one week and cancel them the next, as if affection has an expiration date. The palace had its own cancel culture long before hashtags existed. For you, watching the fall of others is both terrifying and instructive. You see how arrogance speeds the descent, how even small missteps become fatal when enemies are waiting. A careless word overheard, a gift refused, a rumor whispered at the wrong moment, all can ignite the blaze that consumes a favorite. Sometimes it isn't even a mistake. Sometimes it's just the emperor waking up one morning, bored of the same face. That randomness is what makes the palace most dangerous. You can do everything right and still be erased. And yet, people still crave favor, still climb the gilded ladder, knowing it might snap beneath them. Why? Because the rewards are irresistible. For a time, the favored live like royalty themselves. Luxury, attention, power radiating from their presence. Even you, cautious as you are, feel the temptation tugging at you. It's hard not to dream when you see another concubine showered with jewels, or another eunuch addressed with respect by ministers who once ignored him. But you've learned enough to resist chasing too quickly. Survival here isn't about soaring high, but about learning to glide low, avoiding the sharpest winds. You remind yourself of the countless faces who vanished after their fall, their names scrubbed from records, their rooms reassigned before the ink dried. If you rise, rise carefully. And if you fall, fall quietly, because in this place, even you. So you stand in the shadows, watching another favorite's downfall. Yesterday, servants bowed to him as he passed. Today, they pretend not to see him at all. The transformation is chilling, not just because of his loss, but because it shows you how quickly the palace rewrites memory. Yesterday's glory is today's ghost. And in that moment, you realize that your greatest lesson isn't how to win favor. It's how to outlast its inevitable collapse. You catch your reflection in a bronze mirror one evening, its surface worn and rippled, like a pond disturbed by wind. The face staring back isn't the boy who walked through the palace gates years ago. That boy had wide eyes and calloused hands from carrying buckets in the village. The man reflected now wears silk robes, his skin pale from years indoors, his gaze sharper, lined with both wisdom and weariness. And here's the hook. This is the moment every concubine dreads and secretly anticipates. The day you ask yourself whether the palace made you or unmade you. Time inside these walls doesn't move like it does outside. Villagers count years by harvests, merchants by markets. You count them by emperors. One died in his sleep. Another was overthrown. Another still reigns, but older now. His temper shorter, his attention wandering. Through it all, you've remained, a fixture in the palace, like a carved screen that witnesses drama without ever leaving the room. The younger concubines look at you with the same mix of awe and pity you once felt for the elders. They whisper that you must know every trick of survival, every secret path through the maze. They don't see the cost etched into your eyes. For them, you're proof that survival is possible. For you, survival feels like a hollow victory. History is littered with figures like you. Eunuchs who grew old within the walls, wielding power one moment and vanishing into obscurity the next. Some, like Gao Lishi, left behind legacies as trusted advisors. Others became villains in the chronicles, accused of corruption or betrayal. Most are remembered only as names on a page, their lives compressed into a footnote. You realize you could become any of them, or none at all. The chambers around you haven't changed. The silk curtains still sway with the breeze. The golden screens still shine. The koi still circle endlessly in the ponds. Yet you've changed. Where once you walked nervously, now you move with practiced calm. Where once you craved favor, now you crave peace. You see the palace for what it truly is. Not just a prison or a playground, but a theater where roles outlast the actors. You think back to the boy who entered, dragged from a humble life into a gilded cage. Would he envy the man you've become? You live surrounded by luxuries he could never imagine, yet at the cost of choices he once took for granted. No fields to plow, no children to raise, no freedom to leave. Was it survival? Was it tragedy? Or, in some twisted way, was it triumph? Sometimes, you laugh at the irony. Outside, peasants whisper of the palace as a place of earthly beauty, a dream beyond reach. If only they could see the truth. That beauty can be as suffocating as chains. That silk can strangle just as effectively as rope. Perhaps that's the lesson your life offers. The world envies what it does not understand. And yet, in quiet moments, you feel a strange pride. You endured trials that broke others. You learned to balance silence and speech, invisibility and influence, despair and humor. You survived a system designed to consume you. That resilience, at least, is yours. As you set the mirror aside, the bronze catching the lamplight, you know the palace will outlast you. Its walls will echo with new footsteps. Its screens will conceal new whispers. Its chambers will trap new souls. But your story, your endurance, your transformation, lives on, even if history reduces it to a single line. Because in the end, the mirror doesn't just show who you are. It shows that you were here, that you endured, that you mattered, even in a world determined to make you forget yourself. You close the palace mirror, and the reflection fades, but the story doesn't end there. Because while the life of a male concubine carried its own strange burdens, you can't help but glance across the courtyard and wonder about the women who shared those same walls. What filled their endless days? Beyond the jeweled hairpins and silk gowns, how they spend the hours when the emperor's gaze wasn't fixed on them. The question lingers like incense in the air, pulling you deeper into another side of the palace, the daily rhythms of the emperor's concubines. Before you even open your eyes, the palace has already decided how your day will begin. Lanterns flicker outside the carved wooden doors. Eunuchs shuffle in the courtyards. And somewhere a drum beat echoes like a reminder that time here belongs to the emperor, not to you. You don't rise because you want to. You rise because 1,000 invisible eyes expect you to. The silk bedding feels soft, yes, but it's also a weight, a reminder that even in comfort, you are never free. Attendants rush in with basins of warm water, their heads bowed low, their movements precise. You splash your face, but it isn't just washing, it's ritual. In this place, even the act of rinsing sleep from your eyes is loaded with meaning. What if you looked tired? What if someone whispered that you weren't as radiant as yesterday? In a palace where appearances rule, a single yawn might become tomorrow's gossip. Do you think your mornings feel stressful now? Fumbling with coffee before work? Imagine that same pressure, except the entire empire believes your worth is measured in how well you smile after sunrise. The dawn hours are a performance, not a private moment. You slip into embroidered slippers, glide across polished stone, and know that every step is being watched. Even the emperor's most obscure concubines must show discipline. Records from the Ming and Qing dynasties note how concubines were expected to rise at dawn, bathed, groomed, and ready, like actresses waiting backstage for a role they might never be called to play. Can you sense the irony? The higher your beauty, the earlier your morning began, because rivals and attendants alike studied you for flaws. The silence of the Forbidden City is deceptive. Beyond your chamber, the palace is alive, eunuchs calling orders, incense curling skyward from shrines, the clip of guards' boots echoing on flagstones. It feels more like an engine than a home, humming with the energy of duty. And you, as one concubine among hundreds, are just a small part of the machine. In a way, it's like a modern office building. Different ranks, everyone competing quietly, waiting for the boss's attention. Only here, the office is painted in gold, and the stakes are survival. Think of someone like Empress Dowager Cixi. Long before she ruled the empire, she too had mornings like this. Rising early, attendants hovering, her every move catalogued. We often remember her as the formidable woman who steered China through turbulent decades. But history forgets that her day once began the same way as yours. Obedience before breakfast. Even the powerful had to start as silent players in this grand performance. The morning air bites as you step toward the courtyard. Dew clings to peonies. Mist floats across the pathways, and golden tiles overhead catch the first blush of light. It's breathtaking. But beauty here is a cage. You can't simply wander. You walk where you're told, stop when required, smile only when appropriate. Even paradise becomes exhausting if you're never allowed to sit in it freely. By the time the sun clears the walls, you're fully awake, dressed, and polished. You've been evaluated without a word, silently scored by attendants, rivals, perhaps even higher-ranking concubines watching from shadows. And so, your first task of the day is not eating, not praying, not even waiting for the emperor. It's proving you deserve to exist inside this golden prison. Now that you've shaken off sleep and stepped into your role, the next concern is more delicate. Turning your body into living art. The basin of water is taken away, and now begins the real work of the morning, the transformation. You are no longer simply yourself. You are a canvas, a carefully maintained painting, polished to near perfection. Attendants arrive with trays of combs, jade-handled brushes, powders in porcelain jars, oils infused with flowers, and strings of hairpins so delicate they could double as weapons. It isn't quick. It isn't simple. It's an hours-long process of sculpting a human being into something more than human. A vision. The first step is hair. Long, black strands must be combed, oiled, and arranged into elaborate coils and knots. Some styles, like the towering Liang Batu of the Qing court, could take more than an hour to perfect. Imagine trying to hold still as 3 attendants tug, pin, and twist your head into something resembling a crown of architecture. It's not unlike getting your hair styled for a modern wedding, except you do it every day, not once in a lifetime. And if one pin is crooked, someone will notice. Next comes the skin. Attendants dab powders made of crushed pearls or ground rice, meant to leave your face pale and smooth. A sheen of oil on your lips, a faint touch of rouge to your cheeks, perhaps the faint outline of delicate brows. The ideal was porcelain perfection, a surface so flawless it looked untouchable. Do you ever scroll through social media, wondering how someone wakes up looking so perfect in the morning? Concubines lived that expectation daily, without filters, with the knowledge that even a blemish could alter their future. Perfume follows. Small pouches of herbs and flower petals are tucked into sleeves or hung from the waist. A faint fragrance of jasmine or sandalwood trails you wherever you walk, leaving behind the memory of your presence even if you say nothing at all. It was more than vanity. Scent was considered part of one's aura, an extension of elegance. You are expected to be a walking atmosphere, not just a person. Jewelry comes next. Each piece not only decoration, but also rank. Jade bangles, gold hairpins, coral beads. Your accessories speak louder than your words. Higher-ranked consorts are permitted heavier jewels, while lower ranks make do with simpler trimmings. Every glittering stone is a status symbol, and every missing one is a reminder of where you stand in the invisible hierarchy. Think of how modern companies hand out different colored badges or corner offices. The palace did the same, only in silk and gold. You sit, silent, while others labor over you. Attendants chatter quietly about palace gossip. Who sneezed in front of the emperor yesterday? Who may have caught his eye at last night's banquet? You pretend not to listen, but of course you do. The harem's survival isn't just beauty, it's knowledge. Knowing what's whispered behind closed doors can sometimes protect you more than any powder or comb. All this effort is not only about pleasing the emperor, it is also about outshining rivals. Imagine dozens, even hundreds of women rising in chambers all across the palace, each surrounded by attendants, each painted, powdered, perfumed, and presented. You're not competing against one or two people. You're competing against an entire gallery of living artwork. It's exhausting to think that your hairstyle this morning might decide how history remembers you, but in this place, it just might. And then there's the cost. Historical records note that palace cosmetics could be made of rare ingredients, pearls, camellia oil, sometimes even lead-based powders. They made you shine, but at a price. Imagine a lipstick that slowly sickened you, or a face cream that damaged your skin permanently. Beauty was a weapon, but also a poison. The irony is sharp. You were expected to be timeless, yet the very products used to achieve that could shorten your time. Even Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman ever to rule China in her own name, knew the power of presentation. Long before she became empress, she had mastered the arts of grooming, dress, and poise. Chroniclers describe her as radiant, her presence unforgettable. It wasn't chance. It was daily discipline, the result of mornings spent in the same rituals you endure now. When you hear her name in history, remember, her rise began in front of the mirror, long before it reached the throne. Finally, when the hairpins are in place, the last powder smoothed, and the jewels adjusted just so, the attendants step back. The mirror shows not just you, but the palace's idea of you. Perfect, graceful, flawless. And yet, beneath it all, you're still aware of the cost. The hours lost, the strain in your neck from holding still, the quiet anxiety that someone else looks even better today. By now, the sun has risen higher, and your chamber glows with natural light, bouncing off silk screens and polished jade. You are ready, not for rest, not for joy, but for presentation. But of course, beauty is useless without the right clothes. Silk rustles before you even stand. Attendants glide in carrying folded layers of fabric, each piece brighter and heavier than the last. Dressing is not about comfort here. It's about politics. Every robe, every embroidered sleeve, every sash is a statement of where you stand in the pecking order of the Forbidden City. Forget sweatpants or a hoodie. In this world, the wrong color on your shoulder could be interpreted as arrogance. And arrogance was dangerous. The first layer is always simple. A thin silk undergarment, soft against the skin, meant to protect the fine outer robes from sweat. Over that comes the middle garment, often plain but carefully fitted, a quiet reminder that elegance starts from what no one sees. And then, the real spectacle, the outer robe. Embroidered dragons, phoenixes, and lotus blossoms crawl across the fabric, each design loaded with meaning. Yellow was reserved for the emperor himself, but a flash of gold thread woven into a concubine's robe might hint at imperial favor. If you've ever noticed how uniforms in modern companies quietly distinguish who's in charge, different ties, better suits, it's the same principle. Only here, the stakes involve survival. Jewelry, of course, must match. A robe with cranes calls for hairpins shaped like wings. A robe with flowers demands bracelets that echo blossoms. Each detail whispers something, and every whisper is being heard by someone. The court was like a stage, and you, every morning, were an actor dressed by an army of stylists. Can you imagine living each day as though you were constantly preparing for a red carpet event? Only the audience is your rivals, and the critics are eunuchs with long memories. Weight is another matter. These garments are not light. Silk may sound airy, but embroidered silk, layered 3 or 4 times, feels more like armor. Some robes weighed several kilograms, especially those heavy with pearls or gold thread. Standing in them too long strained your back. Walking gracefully was a skill all its own. And yet, you had to glide as though floating. If you stumbled, the rumor might spread that you were clumsy, unworthy of favor. Historical records describe concubines shuffling along the polished stones of the palace, their sleeves dragging like banners, their embroidered shoes barely lifting from the ground. The effect was deliberate, slow, controlled, almost hypnotic. You didn't just walk. You performed an illusion of serenity. In a world where every rival is watching, even footsteps carry political weight. Consider consort Yang Yuhuan, better known as Yang Guifei, one of the famed 4 beauties of China. Her attire was said to dazzle courtiers into silence. Her robes so exquisite they became symbols of her influence over Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang dynasty. It wasn't only her face that enchanted, but the full presentation. Jewels, silks, perfumes, and poise. Dressing, in other words, could tilt the balance of an empire. Once dressed, you step back to face the bronze mirror. The reflection stares back like a stranger, layered, jeweled, perfected, and yet suffocating under expectation. Your arms feel heavy, your breath slowed by tight sashes, but none of that shows. Outwardly, you are serenity. Inwardly, you are calculating. Does this robe draw too much attention? Will it make enemies whisper? Or will it make the emperor glance twice when you pass? The attendants beam at their work, bowing slightly, as if to say, "Now, you are ready." Ready for what, though? Not freedom, not relaxation. You are ready to be seen, to be judged, to be measured like a fine painting unveiled to critical eyes. And so, with your robes swaying around you like banners, you step out into the corridor. The palace is waking fully now, sunlight bouncing from glazed roof tiles, the air thick with incense. But your day is far from over. Looking beautiful is one thing. Proving you're more than a mannequin requires another kind of training. The arts that kept a concubine's mind sharper than her rivals. Beauty alone won't keep you alive here. The palace is overflowing with flawless faces, so what sets you apart is what you can do. And this is where the real training begins. The endless hours of perfecting the arts. Imagine being told that your survival depends not just on how you look, but on how gracefully you pluck a string on a zither. In this palace, talent is not a hobby, it's insurance. You sit before a guqin, its 7 strings stretched across polished wood, and the room fills with soft vibrations as your fingers glide over them. Every note must be precise, every pause deliberate. Concubines were expected to master music, poetry, calligraphy, and even dance. Think of it as a curriculum, except instead of grades, you earn glances, and instead of diplomas, you earn survival. Missing a note isn't just embarrassing. It could lower your standing in a hierarchy where even small missteps are amplified. Music wasn't just entertainment. The guqin was linked to moral refinement. Its tone said to align the player with harmony itself. To play clumsily suggested not only poor training, but poor character. Do you ever remember being judged at school talent shows, sweating while you tried to get the rhythm right? Imagine that same pressure, only multiplied by the fact that the emperor might be listening and deciding your fate on the other side of a screen. Poetry lessons followed. You sit with brush and inkstone, grinding ink slowly, tracing characters onto silk paper. Each stroke is a test of patience. To compose a verse was to reveal wit, sensitivity, and intellect. Famous concubines often left behind poems that still survive, tiny windows into their confined lives. One Tang concubine, consort Shu Hui, became known not only for her beauty, but for her literary skill. Her poems so admired that Emperor Taizong cherished them like jewels. In other words, a clever poem could buy you more favor than a flawless face. Calligraphy demanded discipline of a different kind. Every line, every curve had to breathe elegance. To write with shaky strokes suggested a shaky spirit. Concubines trained to write as though their ink carried grace itself, each scroll a mirror of their inner refinement. Modern comparisons? Think of how today handwriting may seem trivial. But imagine if your entire career depended on how beautifully you signed your name. That's how serious calligraphy was here. And then, of course, dance. Flowing sleeves, precise steps, gestures balanced between allure and restraint. Dancing wasn't about spectacle like in a theater. It was about demonstrating control, rhythm, and poise. Some dances were slow, like moving silk in the wind. Others told stories of loyalty or longing. Each step carried meaning, and you learned them as carefully as soldiers learn drills. You weren't just entertaining. You were proving that your body could be as disciplined as your mind. This training wasn't optional. From dawn until afternoon, concubines cycled through lessons, practices, and rehearsals. Eunuchs and older matrons judged progress, noting who excelled and who lagged. A concubine who could sing, recite, and paint became far more valuable than one who only looked beautiful. Think of it like a modern resume, except instead of bullet points, your qualifications were zither notes, brush strokes, and verses whispered under lantern light. The pressure was immense. A slip of the tongue in a poem, a cracked note in a song, even a stumble in a dance could be seized upon by rivals. And gossip traveled fast. Did you hear she forgot the second verse? Did you notice her ink blot? These whispers could shape futures. You weren't just learning the arts. You were learning survival through performance. And yet, there was satisfaction too. When the guqin rang true under your fingers, when a poem poured from your brush like water, when you moved through dance without faltering, there was a moment, brief but real, where you felt free. As though in those arts, you found a piece of yourself untouched by the palace's gaze. Perhaps that's why so many concubines left behind poems, songs, and painted scrolls. They were not just showing skill. They were preserving themselves. Take Empress Zhao Feiyan of the Han Dynasty. Before rising to power, she was known for her breathtaking dance. Her movements described as so light she seemed to float. Her art became her entry into the emperor's heart, proof that skill could alter destiny. History remembers her not only as an empress, but as one of the greatest dancers in Chinese lore. So you sit, hour after hour, practicing, polishing, perfecting. You may never know if the emperor will notice, but you know your rivals will. And that's enough to keep you rehearsing until your fingertips ache and your brush hand trembles. Later, when the lessons pause, there comes a quieter ritual, a chance to sit with others over tea, where every polite smile conceals another kind of performance. The tea is poured in silence, but the silence is anything but peaceful. Porcelain cups clink lightly on lacquered tables, steam curls from the spout, and the fragrance of jasmine or chrysanthemum fills the air. To an outsider, it looks serene. Delicate women sharing a calm morning ritual. But you know better. This is not about relaxation. This is about masks. Each mile hides calculation. Each compliment disguises suspicion. And every sip is taken as though it might contain more than just tea. You take your seat among fellow concubines, careful to settle neither too close nor too far. Distance here is a message. Too eager, and you look desperate for attention. Too aloof, and you look arrogant. The right spot suggests confidence without overstepping. Imagine attending an office meeting where the simple choice of where you sit could affect your entire career. That's what tea time feels like in the palace. The conversation begins with pleasantries. The flowers in the East Garden are especially fine today, someone remarks. Your robe's embroidery is exquisite, another adds. Polite words float like bubbles, light and harmless on the surface, but you can sense the weight beneath. Are these compliments, or are they traps? Did she mean your robe is beautiful, or that it's too extravagant for your rank? Every sentence here has two meanings, and it's your job to catch both. Gossip is the true drink at these gatherings. Who was summoned last night? Who received new jewels? Who has fallen out of favor? Whispers spread faster than steam rising from the cups. No one admits to starting the stories, yet everyone listens carefully. A clever concubine never spreads gossip too boldly. She lets it drift like smoke, so no one can trace its source. And as you sip, you nod at the right times. Laugh lightly when expected, never letting your eyes betray your thoughts. Tea also served a practical purpose in the palace. Many concubines were trained in the art of tea preparation, each pour and gesture carrying symbolic refinement. To lift the lid of the cup gracefully, to pour without spilling a drop, to serve with a steady hand. These tiny skills reinforce the illusion of calm, cultivated poise. Even in something as ordinary as tea, you were being judged. Do you ever find yourself performing manners in front of guests? Careful how you hold your glass or cutlery? Now, imagine your life depending on it. there is, of course, the danger of poison. Records and rumors alike tell of rivals slipping powders into drinks. Whether every story was true hardly mattered. The possibility alone was enough to keep you on edge. Some concubines trained attendants to taste tea before them. Others rotated cups discreetly to keep enemies guessing. Each sip was a gamble. What looks like a gentle tea ritual is, in fact, a battlefield where the weapons are porcelain cups and sweet smiles. History offers plenty of examples. Consort Mei of the Tang dynasty, favored by Emperor Xuanzong after the death of Yang Guifei, was said to have faced endless whispers and schemes during these kinds of gatherings. Every step she took in social rituals was scrutinized. If she laughed too much, she was frivolous. If she laughed too little, she was cold. Even the steam rising from her tea could feel like smoke from a fire she didn't light but had to survive. Still, there was strategy. Some concubines used tea time to form subtle alliances, building networks of mutual protection. A shared laugh here, a sympathetic glance there, might bloom into a partnership that helped both survive the harem's cruelty. Others used the setting to quietly isolate rivals, excluding them from conversation until they seemed invisible. The tea was warm, yes, but the atmosphere was cold, as if everyone at the table was both a friend and an enemy at the same time. You sip, smile, listen, and store away every fragment of information. Did she mention the emperor looked tired? Did she hint at a quarrel between eunuchs? These small details might prove vital later. A concubine with sharp ears often lived longer than one with dazzling eyes. And when the teacups are finally empty, when the porcelain clinks one last time, you rise with the same grace you entered. Outwardly, it seems nothing happened, just a peaceful morning gathering. But inside, you know you've just survived another test. Now, the palace calls you back to order, for lessons in hierarchy and duty are never far away. Your attendants move like shadows, always present, never forgotten. They dress you, fetch water, prepare cosmetics, carry trays, and whisper the daily rules as if you might somehow forget them. To an outsider, this might look like luxury. Imagine being surrounded by people who do everything for you. But in the palace, attendants are not simply helpers. They are mirrors of your status, measuring sticks of your importance, and sometimes even spies. The higher your rank, the more attendants flutter at your side. A favored concubine might walk with a small procession of maids adjusting her sleeves, holding her train, carrying scented fans. A lower-ranked concubine might make do with just one maid, or worse, be forced to share. The number of hands that lift your robe is not about comfort. It's about visibility. It tells others where you stand, without a word spoken. Think of it like today's world, where a CEO steps out of a car with drivers and assistants, while a junior employee slips in unnoticed. The palace made the same statement, only with silk and silence. But these attendants were more than symbols. They also shaped your survival. Every detail they managed could affect your reputation. If a maid tied your sash unevenly, others might whisper that you were careless. If she prepared the wrong tea, you could be accused of arrogance. You depended on them, and yet you never fully trusted them. After all, eunuchs and palace maids often carried tales from one chamber to another. What you whispered in confidence at night might be murmured in the emperor's ear by morning. And so you learned the delicate art of managing servants. Too strict, and they might resent you. Too soft, and they might forget respect. The balance was constant. Did you know Empress Dowager Cixi, before she rose to power, was known for her ability to command attendants with both firmness and charm? Her mastery of this delicate relationship helped her navigate the palace's dangerous politics long before she became the woman behind the throne. Even here, leadership began not with armies, but with the way you handled a handful of maids. Hierarchy extended beyond your attendants, of course. Within the harem, every concubine had a rank, and the rules were suffocatingly clear. The empress sat at the top, followed by noble consorts, then consorts, then concubines of various titles down to mere attendants. Every bow, every greeting, every seating arrangement was dictated by these invisible lines. If you forgot to bow low enough, or if you walked one step ahead of someone ranked above you, the insult could echo for weeks. Have you ever been in a workplace where seating at the table silently announced who mattered? Imagine that system multiplied by dozens, with punishments for forgetting your place. This hierarchy didn't just exist on paper. It shaped daily life. Meals were served differently by rank. Robes were embroidered differently. Even the number of candles in your chamber could signal your standing. The palace wasn't simply a home. It was a maze of invisible ladders, and every rung mattered. Your attendants guided you through this maze. They whispered the order of bows, reminded you when to speak, when to remain silent. Yet you couldn't help but wonder, were they protecting you or protecting themselves? After all, their loyalty often shifted to whoever held the most power. A maid who served you today might serve your rival tomorrow, and every secret you shared could be carried along with her. Still, survival meant leaning on them. You had to trust them to some degree, because without them, you couldn't maintain the standards demanded of palace life. They lit your lamps, washed your robes, delivered your letters, carried your perfume sachets, and sometimes, in rare moments, they became your only friends, the ones who saw your tears when no one else could. But friendship here was dangerous, and even kindness could be misinterpreted. Servants and hierarchy then were both shield and sword. They could elevate you, or they could be the hands that pushed you down. And as you move through the palace corridors, flanked by watchful attendants, you are reminded once again that in this place, nothing is ever truly yours. Not your robe, not your privacy, not even your secrets. And yet, there is no time to dwell. For just beyond these walls lies another demand, one even stricter than beauty or gossip, the daily lessons of court etiquette, where a single wrong gesture could undo everything you've built. One wrong bow could ruin you. That's the hook, and that's the truth. In a palace where hundreds of eyes study every movement, court etiquette is not just manners, it's survival. You walk into the training hall, and immediately the weight of the space presses down. Polished floors reflecting candlelight, scrolls hanging with maxims about loyalty and obedience, and rows of concubines lined up like students about to take an exam they can never fully pass. Every gesture has a rule. How low do you bow to the empress? How far do you kneel before the emperor? Do your sleeves drape gracefully as you rise, or do they flutter awkwardly? The court judged not just your devotion, but the elegance of your devotion. It's like a theater rehearsal where the stakes are real, and the critics have the power to erase you from history. The teachers are strict. Older matrons, often women who rose in rank through flawless conduct, bark corrections in sharp tones. Lower, slower. Do not look directly at the emperor's face. You repeat movements over and over until they blur into muscle memory. The bow must flow like water. The kneel must land like silk falling. The pause between motions must suggest reverence, but never hesitation. Do you remember being drilled in school to stand straight, hands behind your back, repeating the same posture until it felt unnatural? Multiply that feeling by hours, with the added knowledge that a single slip could spark whispers of incompetence. Speech is another battlefield. You practice intonation, the rhythm of your words, the respectful titles that must precede every phrase. Too loud, and you are brash. Too soft, and you are timid. The ideal lies in the middle, firm but deferential, confident but humble. Imagine trying to pitch your voice at the exact right note every single time you open your mouth. Even a yes had layers. How you said it, when you said it, to whom you said it. Rituals are rehearsed endlessly. You learn where to stand during ceremonies, when to bow during sacrifices, how to carry offerings without spilling a drop of wine or trembling under the gaze of elders. One forgotten step, and rivals are quick to point out your failure. In this world, etiquette wasn't just for show. It was proof of loyalty to the system itself. Break it, and you weren't just rude, you were rebellious. Consider the story of Empress Shu of the Ming Dynasty. She was known for her strict adherence to ritual, often reminding even the emperor of proper order. Her mastery of etiquette helped her maintain authority over hundreds of concubines. Where others stumbled, she never faltered. Her example made clear that in the palace, discipline and ritual equaled power. And etiquette wasn't just about the emperor. It governed your interactions with every other woman. A lower-ranked concubine had to bow deeper to one ranked higher. Seating was arranged by order of rank. Even the way you exchanged greetings at morning assemblies was codified. Forgetting to bow to the right person could breed a lifelong enemy. Think of modern corporate life, where forgetting to acknowledge the wrong manager in a meeting can haunt you for months. In the palace, that mistake could cost you far more than embarrassment. Hours slip by in the training hall, your knees aching from repeated bows, your arms heavy from holding postures. Yet you know that this is only practice. When the time comes, when you stand in a real ceremony, or worse, before the emperor himself, there will be no corrections, no second chances. Every gesture must flow without thought, like breathing. And so, day after day, you drill etiquette until your body moves automatically. A stranger might think you graceful, poised, serene, but you know the truth. It isn't serenity. It's conditioning. It's survival. And as you leave the training hall, legs sore and back stiff, another thought creeps in. What happens when the lessons end and the waiting begins? Waiting is the hardest part. You've dressed, powdered, rehearsed bows and poems, and yet most of your day slips by in silence, sitting in chambers heavy with incense and expectation. Imagine being ready for a job interview every single day, knowing the call might never come. That's life in the harem. An endless audition for an audience of one. You sit on low cushions, silk sleeves pooling around you, attendants fanning slowly to keep the air moving. Outside, the palace buzzes with eunuchs, guards, and servants. Inside, time drips like honey. You're not allowed to wander freely, not allowed to pursue hobbies of your own choosing. The Emperor's summons could arrive at any moment, or not at all. And that uncertainty gnaws at you. Some days, the summons means everything. To be chosen is not just honor. It can raise your rank, secure gifts, earn jealousy disguised as admiration. A single night might change your future forever. Other days, the summons feels like a curse. What if you are summoned when you're unprepared? What if rivals spread rumors about why you were called? What if, worst of all, you aren't called for weeks? In a world where visibility equals existence, being forgotten is its own kind of death. So you wait. And waiting changes people. Some concubines become restless, pacing chambers, snapping at servants. Others retreat inward, writing secret poems or embroidering endlessly just to keep hands busy. Have you ever stared at your phone, waiting for a message that never came, refreshing the screen again and again? Multiply that anxiety by years, and you glimpse the slow erosion of life inside these walls. History remembers many who spent most of their days in this uncertainty. Take Consort Ban of the Han dynasty. Famous for her intellect and poetry, she nevertheless endured long stretches of neglect when rivals outshone her. Her writings capture the quiet ache of waiting, reflections of a brilliant woman trapped in silence. She found solace in books, but not everyone had her resilience. The emperor's habits added to the tension. Some emperors summoned concubines regularly, others rarely. Some favored just one or two women, leaving dozens to wither in neglect. Each emperor's whim rewrote the daily rhythm of hundreds of lives. To be out of favor meant isolation. To be too much in favor meant jealousy, and jealousy could be deadly. So what do you hope for? To be noticed? Or to be invisible? There's no safe answer. Attendants shuffle in and out with updates that mean little but stir emotions. A rival concubine was summoned last night. Another was seen receiving gifts of jade hairpins. The whispers sting, and though you smile politely when others are mentioned, your stomach knots. Because deep down, every concubine knows. Tomorrow, it could be her. Or never her again. Time stretches oddly in these rooms. You embroider a sleeve, sip tea, recite verses under your breath. You practice smiles in the bronze mirror, adjusting your expression until it looks effortless, though you've rehearsed it 100 times. And still, the knock does not come. Each hour without it feels heavier, like the walls themselves are leaning in. And yet, this waiting isn't meaningless. For some, it becomes a crucible. In the silence, you sharpen your thoughts, observe others more closely, memorize every pattern of favor and neglect. Waiting teaches patience. Waiting teaches strategy. And in the palace, patience and strategy can outlast beauty. As the day wears on and the summons never arrives, you force yourself to remain composed. Outwardly, you are serene, sipping tea, eyes lowered, as though you've already accepted your fate. Inwardly, you are a storm. But storms cannot be shown here. They can only be hidden behind silk sleeves and polite laughter. When the sun dips lower and shadows stretch across the courtyards, attendants bring lamps and prepare evening trays. No summons today. You exhale softly, half in relief, half in disappointment. And tomorrow, the waiting begins again. To endure the endless hours, concubines often turn to diversions, games and gossip, small sparks of life in an otherwise suffocating routine. The silence of waiting eventually cracks. and in its place comes chatter. You sit around low tables, scattered with carved ivory tiles, painted boards, or decks of cards, and the hours pass with games. But don't be fooled. This isn't play in the way children understand it. Every laugh, every gesture, every story shared is another layer of performance, another subtle move in the invisible chessboard of palace life. Mahjong, for instance, was a favorite. Tiles clacked together in quick rhythm, like bones clicking in the hands of fate. The game itself demanded calculation and memory, skills well suited to women who spent their lives maneuvering through invisible rules. Imagine playing poker, where bluffing is half the battle. Mahjong was similar, except here, the stakes weren't just coins. They were impressions. Lose too often, and people thought you careless. Win too often, and they whispered that you were ruthless. How do you strike balance in a game where every outcome has meaning? That was the puzzle concubines faced daily. Other times, smaller diversions filled the hours. Pitch pot, a game of tossing arrows into a narrow jar, or chess-like board games imported from scholars' circles. Each carried its own etiquette, its own way of showing refinement. Even leisure was never really leisure. It was another audition. Think of modern networking events where the wine glasses and small talk disguise the real business happening underneath. That was the atmosphere here, light-hearted on the surface, quietly strategic beneath. And then there was gossip. Games provided the perfect cover. As hands moved tiles or tossed arrows, tongues moved faster. Who was summoned? Who stumbled during morning rituals? Who received new silk robes? Stories spread like fire across dry reeds. Sometimes they were harmless, the kind of whispers people tell just to pass time. But often they carried daggers. A careless remark about someone's trembling hand or crooked robe could circulate until it reached the ears of someone important. By then, it was no longer a story. It was evidence. Concubines had to master the art of speaking without speaking. Hints, implications, half-sentences that allowed listeners to draw their own conclusions. No one wanted to be caught as the source of a rumor, yet everyone wanted the rumor to circulate. It's not so different from today's world of office whispers and social media subtweets. Only here, the consequences could be far more severe. History offers a telling example in the story of Zhao Heida, a favored consort of Emperor Cheng of Han. Her influence grew not only from her beauty, but from her clever manipulation of palace networks, whispers, alliances, and rumors that shifted the balance of power until she stood at the center. Gossip in her hands was a weapon sharper than any blade. But gossip wasn't always cruel. Sometimes it bonded women together, offering tiny escapes from monotony. A joke about an absent rival, a sly comment about a eunuch's clumsiness, even laughter over a shared mistake. These small exchanges gave relief in a life otherwise ruled by silence and suspicion. Still, even those lighter moments carried risk. Laughter could be misinterpreted. Smiles could be used against you. And so you played the games, shuffled the tiles, tossed the arrows, and smiled at the right times. Outwardly, it was all innocent. Inwardly, you were measuring every word, every gesture, deciding when to laugh, when to nod, when to remain silent. Even joy had to be rehearsed here. The hours stretched, softened by tea, warmed by lantern light, and filled with the illusion of leisure. But as the trays of games were cleared away, and the gossip dimmed to silence, the palace reminded you again that nothing was free. not even a meal. A banquet in the palace is not dinner, it's theater. Plates arrive like actors on stage, each dish dressed in colors and aromas meant to dazzle. Hook moment. Every bite you take is both a performance and a risk. You sit at a lacquered table, inlaid with jade, the flicker of lanterns making the porcelain shimmer. The attendants bring dish after dish. Roasted duck glazed with honey, delicate dumplings shaped like flowers, soups fragrant with ginseng and herbs. The variety overwhelms, yet you know better than to lose yourself in taste. Meals here are less about nourishment and more about display. The seating itself already tells a story. Higher-ranked consorts eat at the front. Served first, their tables heavier with delicacies. Lower-ranked women sit further back, their portions smaller, their dishes simpler. To a visitor, it might look like a feast for everyone. But to you, the arrangement is a constant reminder of hierarchy. Even your chopsticks know their place. The food, beautiful as it is, comes with tension. Every dish can be loaded with symbolism. Lotus roots represent harmony, peaches promise longevity, and fish hint at abundance. To be served, these is not just kindness. It's a message about your standing. But what if you are served bitter melon, or something plain when others receive extravagance? That too is a message, and often not a friendly one. Imagine attending a corporate dinner, where the boss pours wine for some employees and ignores others. The gesture is small, but the meaning is loud. And then there's the fear of poison. History is thick with stories of suspicious meals, a sip too bitter, a bite followed by sudden illness, and whispers spread instantly. This fear meant that meals became rituals of caution. Attendants might taste your food first. Some concubines rotated dishes between friends to confuse enemies. Even when the food was safe, the suspicion never fully left your mind. Eating became less about pleasure, more about careful calculation. The emperor's presence could heighten the tension. If he attended, every concubine fought to appear graceful, eating delicately, never too much, never too little. A clumsy spill of sauce could ruin you. A greedy bite could be mocked for weeks. The emperor might casually hand a plum to one woman, and that single gesture could ignite jealous fury across the hall. Think of how one comment on social media can shift a crowd's perception overnight. Magnify that by imperial power, and you understand the stakes. History remembers how meals shaped lives. Yang Guifei, beloved of Emperor Xuanzong, was famous for her love of lychees. Couriers rode hundreds of miles to bring them fresh to the palace, and her favor only deepened. A fruit became a symbol of her power. Yet that very favor also sparked resentment. Whispers that indulgence was ruining the empire. What nourished one woman's rise fed another's downfall. Meals also tested alliances. Sharing dishes with rivals required a mask of politeness, laughter forced around chopsticks. Sometimes a concubine would deliberately compliment a rival's dish, a show of humility that secretly stung with irony. Every bite carried layers of meaning invisible to outsiders. Even the way you held your chopsticks mattered. Too high, and you looked awkward. Too low, and you looked untrained. A steady hand showed refinement. Eunuchs and attendants watched, memorizing who ate gracefully and who faltered. You weren't just dining. You were on stage, judged by etiquette and elegance. By the end of the meal, you are full, but not satisfied. The flavors linger, But so do the whispers, the sidelong glances, the tension folded into every bite. You rise from the table, knowing that even dinner has been another battle survived. And after the feast, the palace demands yet another performance. For entertainment, too, was never far away. When the plates are cleared and the lanterns burn lower, the palace doesn't grow quieter. It shifts into another stage. Now comes the time for entertainment, and you are both performer and audience. The empress, consorts, and sometimes even the emperor himself expect the concubines to sing, dance, or recite, turning the evening into a living showcase of talent. In this place, silence is suspicious. To sit idle would be to risk invisibility, and invisibility in the palace is a slow kind of erasure. You rise when called, sleeves brushing the polished floor, and step forward as attendants set down a guqin. The strings gleam under lamplight, and all eyes turn to you. Your heart thuds, but your face remains serene. To play is not just to make music. It is to remind everyone that you belong here, that your worth is more than skin deep. Each note is polished from hours of practice, each pause calculated to stretch the silence and hold the listeners. Have you ever spoken in front of a crowd, forcing your voice steady even as your palms sweated? That's the feeling, magnified by the knowledge that one sour note could haunt you for months. If not music, perhaps poetry. You step forward with a scroll in hand, bow lightly, and recite verses that thread longing and beauty together. The emperor is absent tonight, but others listen closely. Poetry, after all, has a way of reaching ears that are not in the room. A clever line, memorized by attendants, might travel across the palace and find its way to the throne. This is not mere art. It's a message, a spark sent into the network of whispers. Sometimes the entertainment takes form in dance. Silk sleeves flutter like wings, your body turning slowly, steps precise, gestures refined. It's not about wild energy, but controlled grace. Each movement says, I am disciplined, I am worthy, I am more than another ornament in silk. Those who watch see not just beauty, but proof of self-mastery. History remembers Zhao Feiyan for this very reason. Her dances were said to be so light she seemed to float, and it was that art which propelled her into the emperor's favor. Even conversation could become a kind of performance. If asked to tell a story, you chose carefully. A tale that reflected loyalty, a fable that hinted at wisdom, never anything too bold. Words were as dangerous as weapons here. A misplaced metaphor might be read as criticism, a too clever joke as arrogance. And yet, to be too plain was equally risky. The art lay in balance, enough wit to intrigue, enough humility to disarm. Other concubines watched as keenly as the officials. They noted which verses earned a nod, which songs ended in silence, which dances drew a rare smile. Performances were fuel for tomorrow's gossip. Did you see her voice tremble? Did you hear how clever her poem was? Each comment added or chipped away at your place in the palace hierarchy. Entertainment also carried danger beyond embarrassment. Records whisper of jealousy turning into sabotage, hairpins accidentally loosened so a dancer's bun collapsed mid-performance, strings tampered with so a guqin rang false. Even if the emperor laughed it off, rivals remembered, and reputations shattered. It's not so different from modern talent competitions, where one slip might go viral, but here the audience held the power of life and death. And yet, in these moments, there was also an escape. When your fingers struck the right note, when your voice carried perfectly, when your body moved in rhythm with the music, you felt almost free. The palace walls fell away for an instant, and all that remained was art, pure and unchained. Perhaps that's why so many concubines clung to their gukin or brushes. They were the only things in this gilded prison that truly belonged to them. But when the songs fade and the applause, polite or genuine, dies down, the reality returns. Entertainment is only one part of the performance of life here. Behind the curtain waits a quieter act, one not meant for the public. Letters, longings, and memories written in secret under the flicker of an oil lamp. The room is quieter now. Lanterns burn lower, casting long shadows across the carved screens, and the chatter of the evening fades into a hush. This is the time when concubines who aren't summoned slip back into their chambers, attendants dismissed to the corners, and the silence becomes almost heavy. What do you do with that silence? Some pick up brushes and write. Others stitch delicate embroidery by candlelight. But for many, the hours of night are filled with letters and longing. You sit before a low desk, inkstone beside you, grinding stick against stone until black liquid pools like a mirror. The act itself is calming, a way to still thoughts in a world where nothing feels still. You dip the brush and let characters flow, sometimes forming poems, sometimes letters never meant to be delivered. In these secret writings, the mask drops. You no longer perform for rivals or attendants. You pour what you can't speak. Loneliness, frustration, even small hopes bleed into every stroke. Some concubines wrote to family they would never see again. Entering the palace often meant severing ties with the outside world. Parents, siblings, even childhood friends became memories blurred by distance. Letters rarely reached beyond the gates, but still women wrote them, folding longing into words they knew would sit unread. Can you imagine writing text messages you know will never be sent, just to feel like you're still speaking to someone? That's what these letters were, echoes into the void. Others wrote for themselves, diaries hidden beneath lacquered boxes, verses pressed between silk garments. Many of these writings survive today, fragments of concubines who otherwise might have been forgotten. Their words reveal humor, sorrow, sharp wit, even rebellion veiled in metaphor. They prove that behind the powdered faces and graceful bows lived women with sharp minds and restless hearts. Consider Lady Ban, also called Ban Jieyu, from the Han Dynasty. She was remembered not only for her intelligence, but for her poetry, some of which survives. In one famous piece, she compared herself to a discarded autumn fan, once useful, now forgotten. Her words captured the pain of fading favor, but also the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be erased. The emperor might ignore her, but history did not. Longing also meant memory. Many concubines clung to fragments of life before the palace. The smell of home gardens, the laughter of siblings, the taste of village food. At night, those memories grew sharper, like wounds pressed under the quiet. Some tried to recreate pieces of that world, embroidering flowers they once saw, writing about landscapes they would never return to. The palace gave them silks and jewels, but it took away the freedom to choose who they missed. And then there was the longing for freedom itself, to step outside the high red walls, to walk through a market, to touch earth instead of polished stone. Some women never again saw the world beyond the gates once they entered. Imagine being locked inside a mansion your entire life, where luxury surrounds you, but even the horizon is forbidden. For concubines, that was not metaphor. That was daily reality. Still, longing had to be hidden. Too much visible sorrow could mark you as weak, too distracted to serve with grace. So you learned to smile in the day, even while writing aching words at night. Attendants might notice, rivals might pry, and in a place where every weakness could be turned against you, secrecy became as important as poetry. The night deepens, ink dries, brushes are set aside. You fold away the parchment, slip it into a hidden box, and blow out the candle. The room plunges into darkness, but your mind keeps spinning. Because as much as you might long for freedom or home, the more immediate danger waits inside the palace walls themselves. Jealousy and schemes that never sleep. Jealousy breathes louder than the palace drums. It seeps into the corridors, settles into the embroidered cushions, and coils around every conversation like smoke. You can almost feel it on your skin, the eyes measuring your robe, the ears catching your laughter, the whispers slipping behind silk screens. In a world where one woman's rise means another's fall, jealousy isn't an occasional guest. It's the permanent resident. The schemes it breeds are subtle. A misplaced word, a compliment given with a sting, a small rumor seated at tea. Concubines rarely fought openly. Instead, they perfected the art of invisible daggers. A powder compact left on your table might actually be laced with irritants to redden your skin. A hairpin, gifted with a smile, might carry barbs of gossip sharper than metal. And always, rivals smiled sweetly, hands folded, as though nothing sinister could possibly be at play. Imagine living in an environment where colleagues aren't just competing for promotions, but for their very existence. That's the harem. Every advantage you gain costs someone else their chance at favor, and they won't forget it. The jealousy of rivals was not petty. It was survival instinct. Some stories are chilling. During the Tang dynasty, the favored consort Yang Guifei faced immense hostility from others who envied her influence over Emperor Xuanzong. Whispers grew into outright resentment, and when political turmoil erupted, her enemies seized the moment. In the end, she was strangled on the emperor's reluctant order, the culmination of years of jealousy weaponized into deadly force. Her fate is a stark reminder. In the palace, love could turn to liability overnight, but not every scheme ended in death. Sometimes it was slow erosion. A concubine might find her robes suddenly soiled by accident, her jewelry misplaced, her attendants bribed to make her look careless. One day, she arrives late to a ritual because a servant misinformed her. The next, she's accused of arrogance for failing to bow correctly. Individually, the events seem small. Together, they form a pattern that drags her reputation down. And jealousy didn't only come from peers. Even attendants, eager to climb by association, could harbor envy. A maid envious of her mistress's status might whisper secrets to another chamber, trading loyalty for influence. Eunuchs, too, often manipulated rivalries, fanning jealousy so they could gain favors from both sides. In a palace of hundreds, even the walls seemed to conspire. The irony is that many concubines, while smiling in public, privately admitted the poison of jealousy in their poems and writings. Some verses describe the pain of being slandered, of watching favor slip away due to rumors they couldn't fight. Others use metaphors, wilted flowers, autumn winds, to cloak their grief and beauty. These writings survive as proof that behind the powder and poise lived women exhausted by the constant fog of suspicion. Jealousy even reshaped beauty itself. Rival concubines sometimes smeared each other's cosmetics with harmful substances. Historical records hint at powders laced with lead or mercury, substances that gave a temporary glow but sickened the body over time. Imagine realizing your own makeup. The very tool meant to elevate you might also be the weapon to ruin you. That paranoia hung over every painted face in the harem. And yet, not all women succumbed to bitterness. Some turned jealousy into strategy, using it as a mirror to measure their own standing. If others were whispering about you, it meant you mattered. If they stopped whispering, it meant you were fading into irrelevance. In that twisted way, jealousy became both threat and validation. Still, the daily tension was draining. You could never truly relax, never trust laughter without wondering if it carried a blade. And as night fell, the atmosphere of rivalry didn't soften, it sharpened. For in the dark came the most unpredictable moment of all, the summons or the silence. Nightfall in the palace is not peace, it's uncertainty. As the lamps are lit and shadows stretch across red lacquered walls, every concubine listens for the same sound, the knock at the door. To be chosen or not chosen, both carry weight. Silence can feel like exile. A summons can feel like salvation or like a trap. You sit in your chamber, attendants adjusting the folds of your robe, preparing as though tonight might be the night. Perhaps you've already waited for weeks without hearing your name called. That silence eats at you. What if you are forgotten? What if the emperor's attention never turns your way again? In the harem, being ignored could be worse than being despised. At least envy meant you mattered. But when the knock does come, your stomach knots. Excitement is mixed with dread. What will this night bring? To be summoned is to step into the most intimate theater of the palace, where the stakes are not just favor, but survival. History tells of emperors who kept meticulous records of which concubines visited, even rolling dice or consulting officials to decide the order. Your presence might be chosen by whim, or by politics, or by schemes whispered in the afternoon. It is never entirely about you. The ritual itself was precise. You were bathed again, perfumed, dressed in lighter robes. Eunuchs escorted you to the emperor's chambers, often carrying your name on wooden slips to be recorded. Every step was monitored, every detail preserved. Think of it like a lottery ticket, except the draw is written into the archives of an empire. Not being summoned, however, did not mean safety. Rivals noticed the silence and whispered about it. She has fallen out of favor, they might say. Perhaps the emperor has tired of her. That gossip spread quickly, and each night without the summons fed the narrative of decline. Some women spent years in that silence, their youth fading behind the palace walls, remembered only as names in registers. History gives us striking examples of this tension. In the Qing dynasty, emperors like Qianlong were notorious for their strict systems, recording every concubine's visit with near-bureaucratic precision. Some women were called frequently, showered with jewels, elevated in rank. Others dwindled into obscurity, their lives reduced to long decades of waiting. And yet, a single night could change everything. The irony is sharp. To be chosen might mean honor, but it also drew jealousy like moths to flame. Rivals might conspire harder against you. Attendants might be bribed to sabotage you. Even your food and cosmetics might be tampered with. In the palace, the spotlight was as dangerous as the shadows. And then there were the nights when you heard footsteps pause outside your door, only to move on. That brief flicker of hope, followed by disappointment, carved deeper wounds than silence alone. You lie awake, staring at the carved ceiling beams, replaying every detail of your day. Did you bow low enough this morning? Was your robe too plain? Did a rival whisper something you couldn't hear? In a palace run on rituals, it is easy to believe every gesture was a test you either passed or failed. So night brings neither rest nor comfort. Whether you are summoned or left behind, the uncertainty gnaws at you, carving tension into every evening. And even when sleep finally comes, it isn't the gentle escape you long for. Dreams, too, are crowded with the weight of palace life. Dreams in the palace are never truly restful. You lie on embroidered cushions, heavy silk quilts pressing down like the weight of the day itself, and your mind keeps rehearsing what tomorrow demands. Even in sleep you are acting. You smile in dreams, bow in dreams, recite verses in dreams. It's as though the palace has moved inside your head, its walls closing around even the deepest corners of your mind. Some nights, the dreams are sweet, walking through gardens outside the palace, seeing familiar faces long since lost, tasting food from childhood. You wake with the faint trace of a smile, only to have it vanish as the lanterns flicker back into reality. Other nights, the dreams are heavy, filled with whispers and shadows. The same jealous eyes that followed you during the day, now chasing you into sleep. You toss, turn, and wake with your pulse racing, as if you fought battles in your own bed. The truth is, sleep here is more strategy than rest. You know tomorrow requires the same perfection as today, so you must at least appear refreshed. Attendants notice if your eyes are swollen or your movements sluggish. Rivals notice too, and they will not hesitate to remark that you look tired, weary, or even ill. A single yawn at the wrong time could become the subject of gossip whispered at tea. Have you ever dragged yourself to work after a sleepless night, only to have someone point out how exhausted you look? Imagine that, only multiplied into judgment that could shape your fate. Even sleep itself is monitored. Eunuchs patrol the corridors. Attendants slip in to check lamps, and records sometimes note which concubines were awake at odd hours. Privacy does not exist here. Not in waking, not in sleeping. Your chamber is a cage disguised as luxury. Its golden carvings as much a reminder of confinement as its locked gates. Yet, in these restless hours, you sometimes find clarity. Lying in the dark, you replay the day's rituals. The bow, the robe, the song, the smile. You measure which rivals smiled too sweetly, which attendants whispered too softly. You strategize. Perhaps tomorrow, you'll choose a different robe, speak a different poem, or glance at the right person just long enough to plant a thought. Dreams may not belong to you, but planning does. And in this place, planning is survival. History tells us that some women use these hours of solitude to sharpen their ambitions. Empress Wu Zetian, long before she became the only woman to rule China outright, must have spent countless nights like this, eyes open in the dark, calculating her next move. Her story proves that even inside the cage of the harem, a restless mind could one day seize the empire itself. But most concubines were not Wu Zetian. Most lived and died within these walls, their dreams confined to the same patterns of silk and jade, their names fading into forgotten records. Their nights were filled with restless rehearsals for days that repeated endlessly, each sunrise offering little more than another performance. And so, as you finally drift into a fragile sleep, you understand the bitter truth. Even dreams here are not your own. They belong to the palace, just as your beauty, your talent, your words, and your time do. Tomorrow, the drum will sound again, attendants will rush in, and the cycle will begin anew. And so, chosen listener, the day in the Forbidden City winds to its end. From the first drum at dawn to the final restless dream, concubines lived a life of ritual, beauty, and endless performance, each gesture measured, each word weighed. Beneath the silk and jewels, they were not free, but bound by rules as tight as their robes. Yet within those walls, they found small